All right, I think we can get started. I know a couple more people might be joining as we get going, but let's just get going. So good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Pardo, and I'm joined by my colleague, Barbara Taveras. Barbara has been at the Trust for about 8 years, and I actually just celebrated my 8th anniversary as well. We're really excited today to discuss our work. So we're each going to discuss our grant making areas and then go over the Trust proposal review process, answer some frequently asked questions, and then leave time for you to ask questions at the end. So first of all, we want to thank you and your organizations for doing all that you do to keep New Yorkers safe, healthy, housed, fed, and supported in many other ways. We really value your feedback. So you will all receive a link to a brief survey via email after this session. Please complete the survey, and if you'd like to provide more feedback, you can always reach out to me, Rachel. My contact information will be provided at the end of the presentation. So before I discuss the TA program, just a few logistics. Please keep yourself muted during the presentation. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation, and when doing so, we ask that you raise your hand. And then the webinar will last an hour, and it is being recorded. So I'm going to get going on the technical assistance program. So as you can see, our program goal is to improve the management capacity of nonprofits and strengthen the sector. We make grants to advance public and nonprofit service.
Oh, you went on our.
Oh, sorry, can you keep it up, please? Thank you. Support service and umbrella organizations providing technical assistance, and we make grants to projects that focus on sector-wide systemic challenges. Now, I do want to note that our TA program is really focused on the nonprofit sector as a whole. However, our other grant-making programs that focus on specific issue areas also provide support for TA. So for example, I oversee our People with Disabilities program area. And in that program area, with that budget, I make numerous grants to individual providers that support the disability community to improve their capacity and provide technical assistance. However, this program in which I'm talking about today is thinking about the entire nonprofit sector outside of individual issue areas or programmatic needs. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about the TA program that I'm talking about. So the technical assistance program will undergo a strategic planning initiative probably at the end of 2023 into 2024. We like to take a look at our grant making programs about every 10 years just to make sure that what we're doing aligns with the need of the community. The process for that is identifying a consultant who speaks with our grantees, our colleagues, stakeholders, experts within the field, just to get a sense of whether what we're doing makes sense, whether we're missing any areas, whether we should be doing something different. The consultant develops a report for us, and we use that to develop grant making guidelines, which we share with our board and use to program our grants over the next 10 years. There is unlikely to be major shifts. We usually use this as a way to be more inclusive and think about issues that we haven't been doing so in the past. So I doubt that it's really going to be a major shift from these kind of priority areas in this program goal, but just that's something to think about as we're doing in the next year and a half. Our 2023 priorities were developed through conversations with our grantees, through issues that we've been hearing about with stakeholders and with our colleagues. So those focus areas will be advocacy to get the city to improve contracting and payment processes, because we know this is a huge issue across the nonprofit sector, helping nonprofits address staffing shortages and retention problems, and also the poverty level wages for nonprofit employees. And then supporting nonprofits' efforts to incorporate DEI in their recruitment, in their programming, and in their human resources. So now I'm going to turn it over to Barbara to talk about civic affairs.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us this morning. I should say before we begin that as a special projects officer, I work across the trust on new initiatives developing new grant making strategies and things of that nature. And so I don't have a grant making portfolio per se. This year, however, with the transition of our colleague Pat Swan, I am pitching in to help for the rest of the year manage the grant making for this area of civic affairs. So any proposals that come in, I will take a look at them and follow up with the applicants. Similar to what Rachel shared, the civic affairs area is going to undergo what I would call light revisions, because it was really developed in 2005. So it's way past the due date of updating it. But as Rachel underscored, we don't anticipate that there will be major shifts, although there's one or two areas that we are going to be looking at just to determine how relevant they are for the grant making that we make. As you could see on the screen there, and those of you who have applied for civic affairs funding, we have three broad areas of focus. One of them being voting, both encouraging voting among community members who are what we call low propensity voters, young people, people of color, folks in low income communities, as well as removing obstacles to voting. So sort of expanding access to the ballot, and also educating the public about candidates, elected officials, and things of that nature. The other big area of focus is helping to make government, both local government as well as state government, more accountable. There's a lot of focus on improving government, how government functions in Albany, simply because the state government has a great deal of impact on the city, and particularly in this area of voter access and improving the administration of voting in the city. And then the third big focus area is to promote civic learning and voting among immigrant community members. That area is probably the one that we're going to be looking at a little bit to see, to make improvements as we look to 2024, particularly in the civic learning for children. So that area I anticipate is going to undergo some change. Looking at our priorities for 2023 for this year, there are remaining essentially the same, with a big focus on voting, and again, voting, encouraging voting among low propensity voters. And then I think a lot of focus on improving the election infrastructure in the city, particularly the Board of Elections. And then we have been making a good number of grants in the area of redistricting, and that focus is going to continue for the rest of the year, simply because there's still some districts that are undergoing redistricting, both at the city and state level. So, and that work, the funding that we do in that area of redistricting also reaches a little bit beyond New York City. With that, I'm going to stop and turn it back to Rachel, and be happy to answer your questions at the end.
Okay, so I will go through a little bit of our review process and then answer some frequently asked questions. So the first thing to note about our review process is that we accept applications at any time. We have an open application process, meaning that you don't need a program officer's permission and you don't need to submit an LOI. The dates on our websites are a little bit confusing. They're not deadlines. They provide a time frame for when applicants can expect to hear back from us. And our website provides very concrete instructions for applying, so I urge you to check that out. Every week, the program officers meet as a team to review and assign all incoming proposals. The proposals are assigned to one or more program officers at that meeting, unless it's obvious that they do not meet our guidelines. And these ineligibility criteria are also stated on our website, and those are: we do not support individuals, general operating support, capital and building campaigns, endowments, equipment, deficit financing, or religious purposes. So once the organization submits a proposal, it will receive an automated email from us once it's assigned, or if it's declined. All emails are sent to the organization's paid staff head, which is identified in the proposal cover sheet. We've heard that some of these emails get caught in spam filters, so we advise you and anyone else involved in the trust proposal process to include this email in your, so it won't get caught. No reply at nycommunitytrust.org. So one other thing to note is that as a team, we decide who the proposal will be assigned to. That's not something you as an applicant need to determine in advance. You will be notified that the proposal is assigned, but the email will not tell you which program officer or officers are working on it. Once the proposal is assigned, the program officers complete a full review of the proposal. Program officers assess the quality of the proposed project. They ascertain whether it's a systemic effort and a sound approach that meet the need and is not duplicative of other projects. They look to see whether the activities described will actually address the stated issue, and if these make sense within the context of the field. They look at the organization's finances and governance and whether it has the capability to carry out the project. And they assess the project's relevance to our grant-making guidelines. At this point, the PO will decide if the project merits further investigation. If so, they'll schedule site visits and meetings with the team. We generally only conduct site visits with organizations we are seriously considering for funding. And later I'll discuss why we don't meet with all applicants. If the proposal does not merit further investigation, we'll decline it. All declines are reviewed internally before applicants are notified, and all decline notifications will be sent via email, again, to the paid staff head through that automated email address. If warranted, the program officer will develop a grant recommendation, which is then reviewed internally and presented to our board. Our board meets 5 times a year, and that's February, April, June, October, and December. And all grantees are notified of board approvals on the day of the board meeting. So now to go through a couple frequently asked questions. The first one we get a lot is, why don't program staff meet with potential grantees before they submit proposals? This is because of the volume of proposals we receive. That's about 1,000 proposals each year. We're not able to meet with organizations to help them decide on a project before submitting a proposal. Applicants should read our guidelines to ensure their project aligns with our grant-making goals and then submit a proposal. I should also note on our website, we have some new features. We have videos that explain our guidelines a little bit more in depth. We also have lists of all the grants made within prior years. You can get a sense of what we're supporting. And we regularly update those videos, and we're probably sharing more in the future. Okay. What do we look for when reviewing proposals? We look for a couple things. Systemic change. Is there potential for government funding and/or policy change in the future, or lessons for other service providers? We want to make sure that the grant or the project affects the sector. Examples can include a pilot of an innovative and promising program, expansion or replication of a program proven to work, or gathering data to build proof of a program's value. We do support advocacy efforts, which include both grassroots and lobbying. However, we prefer to focus on discrete projects with specific goals versus a more general advocacy agenda to address a broad-based challenge. We generally do not support projects that serve a small number of people or a single site, one-off event, exhibition, or conference, or efforts to build the internal capacity of a single organization without the potential for broader learnings for the field. So again, I recommend that you look at the guidelines on our website. Finally, a few points about making a proposal competitive. Clarity, brevity, and focus are very important because we get so many proposals. Concrete details on how and why the organization requesting support is best suited to carry out the activities helps build a case. This includes not only its deep knowledge of the field, but also its financial and governance stability. And we use the Better Business Bureau as a starting point when reviewing governance standards. It's paramount that the board is independent and unpaid with at least 5 members. What do we look for when reviewing project budgets? All program officers complete a thorough review of the organizational and project budget, as well as additional financial materials such as audits and 990s as part of our review process. I'm going to go through a few pointers about our budget requirements. Budget should reflect all anticipated costs of carrying out the proposed project, and this should include overhead, also known as administrative expenses. We don't have caps on administrative expenses, but program officers assess what the percentage is appropriate. We do have a 5% administrative expense cap for grants to universities and affiliated nonprofit fiscal sponsors like research foundations. Budget should include funding received or projected from other sources. And I'd like to note here that program officers will ask about any budget gaps or surpluses. If a cost is not discussed in the narrative, it should not be included in the budget. And the budget should reflect the full amount of the project's costs, not just the anticipated grant from the trust. Okay, so the difference between an organizational project and grant budget is a question we get a lot. So an organizational budget is usually approved by the nonprofit's board that lists all the expenses and income reasonably, the reasonable income projections for the entire organization over the course of the year. And those are required as part of our application. The project budget is a snapshot for the single project or initiative that you're seeking funding for. If a project is expected to take more than 1 year, the project budget should reflect that. And again, we require project budgets as part of our application. The grant budgets are not required as part of an application. However, if the grant is awarded, we do ask grantees to report back at the end of the grant period about how the money was used. Question about renewals or multi-year grants. We make project-focused grants, so we look for specific opportunity, expansion, replication, or launch of an effort. We don't support ongoing projects. However, we recognize that some projects, especially new initiatives or advocacy efforts, take longer than a year. And for this reason, we sometimes make multi-year grants. This is at the discretion of the program officer and based on available funding. So if I were to make a 2-year grant this year in 2023, all of that funding comes out of this year's project budget. So we can't borrow money for future years. We're also able to make renewals. We assess the potential for renewal, looking at the progress and the success of the grant and the context, such as changes in the city government, to assess whether a renewal makes sense. Again, we recognize that systemic change takes time, but we become more critical after several renewals to ensure that the project is not turning into general operations. Last question is about our donor advised funds. So some of you are familiar with the fact that the New York Community Trust has have DAFs and donor advisors. So our donor advisors are encouraged to call us about grantees we feature, but we don't have regular conversations with the donor advisors, and we are unable to connect our grantees with donor advisors. So that's just very briefly about that. Okay, so now we can open up for general questions if anyone has them. If you do, please raise your hand and I'll call on you in the order that you're asked. Anyone? Sepa Mujer.
Hi, my name is Marta. Thank you so much for the presentation. My question is regarding if you will consider Long Island area as one of the focus for this grant period.
Right. So the New York Community Trust only focuses on the 5 boroughs. Sometimes we make grants to organizations that are outside the 5 boroughs that are serving New York City residents. We do have affiliates in Long Island and Westchester, and those are focused on the Long Island, Westchester communities. Okay, Keith.
Thank you.
I think I did miss this. There was an email address that you had shared, and then there's also the portal on the website. So what's the preferred way of submitting?
The
Is it
portal.
through the portal?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. So the email address that's our automated email. So
Got
whenever you get notifications of proposal acceptance, declines, board decisions, any of that, it comes from that automated email address. But if you need to submit the applications or the grant reports, that should go through our portal. Sometimes our portal is down, and then you should just directly email your program officer to make sure that that information is received. But for the most part, you should put that information through the portal. Okay, Stephen.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. So two brief questions. So can organizations make multiple asks to different program areas? Because and as a background, we, the Hispanic Federation, we are, we have initiatives in civic engagement and, in health, in education, for example. We're a capacity building organization, right? We're an umbrella organization, right? So there's multiple, as I was reviewing the presentations, I'm like, oh yeah, we could apply to this. Oh yeah, we could apply to this too. Oh, you know what? We could apply to that also. So question. So that's my first question. The second question, as an umbrella organization, is there anything that you would suggest to us in terms of, making sure that this was, that we submit the best, that we put our best foot forward? That's distinct from maybe a single focused nonprofit.
Okay, so for the first question, we can't tell you, no, you can't, because we have an open application process, so you can submit as many proposals as you want. That being said, we're not going to make multiple grants at the same time. That's very rare. When it does happen, it's usually for this organization. So what I would say is put in the proposal that is your priority.
Okay.
It can be cross issue area because we often collaborate. The program officers often work together. So if you have something that is health and education, it makes sense to put them together. You would submit a proposal around that kind of bigger area, and then our health and our education program officers would review it. But I would really advise you not to fish, just to kind of really think about what your priorities are.
Got it.
And then submit, a single proposal. And your second question was, how can an umbrella organization be competitive?
Yeah. Like, is there anything that you would suggest, in terms of us being an umbrella organization, that we have direct service programs, but we also are regranting and organization. And is there anything that you would suggest in terms of putting our best foot forward as an umbrella organization, as opposed to perhaps a nonprofit that is focused on, let's say, there's more single focus, or doesn't have a sub-granting component?
Yeah, I think, we often support umbrella organizations. I think really the fact that you have your ear to the ground and you have a close connection with the nonprofit organizations is really compelling. So I don't think that is a kind of puts you at a disadvantage. I think, by communicating that that's a strength that you bring to the table, that's going to be really important. And the regranting, I think, yes, we recognize that for a lot of nonprofits, they just don't have the resources and the staff time to be able to really participate and engage in technical assistance. So if you can make the argument that your regranting is a way for them to be able to build their capacity and have the capacity to engage in these type of efforts, I think that's really important. Yeah, so go ahead. Did you have a point, Barbara?
I just wanted to add, being a little bit familiar with some of the, for example, Civic Affairs grants that have been made to Hispanic Federation, that consistent with the preference of the trust. For example, we have made grants to Hispanic Federation to assist members with informing, engaging community folks in the redistricting process. Or for example, during the census in 2018, 2020, we made grants to Hispanic Federation and other umbrella organizations so that they could reach out to their members and enable them to then engage community members in whatever the issue area. But I would underscore that, you know, the trust is sort of, as Rachel pointed out, is very project focused and issue focused. So it has to sort of be within those parameters that the proposal has to be crafted.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Ibrahima.
Thank you, Rachel and Barbara. Ibrahima Suara with NY Pays. I had two quick questions. One, Rachel, I think you had mentioned earlier that there are, I guess, several sort of dates or months that the board meets. So I was wondering if you can either repeat that, so we just have it. I don't know if it might be also on the website. And then the second question was around, you know, when we submit a proposal for a specific project, is there a limitation in terms of the funding request? Is there a minimum or a floor for per project or organization, so that we're sort of a little bit more aligned on that end?
Okay. So the board dates, February, April, June, October, December. And we work about 4 months in advance of each board date. So for example, for my April board meeting, I needed proposals by February. So yeah, we work we have a pretty lengthy review process leading up to those board meetings. So if you want to say, for example, if you wanted to get something in for June, you'd have to get it to us around March. And then the funding requests. We don't have a cap or floor. However, we are not a multi-million-dollar funder. So I think our average grant size at this point is about 100, maybe a little bit more than that. I think a very large grant for us is 200. And then since we often make multi-year grants, we can kind of consider that over an 18-month or 2-year period. But I think, yeah, that's kind of like the sweet spot. So I think the smallest grants we generally make that go to our board are about 50, and the largest are up to 200. Mind you, if you look on our website, we do make sometimes larger grants, but those are often for kind of multi-partner collaborations or kind of bigger initiatives in which we're trying to make a really systemic change across the city. Hi, Megan.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. I was curious about, so we're looking for startup funds for a pilot project that would help nonprofits all across New York State. Certainly the majority of nonprofits in New York State are in New York City.
Yeah.
But what would be most of interest? I mean, would it work if we said, okay, this is our total pilot cost, and then the portion of it based on the portion of nonprofits in the state that are based in New York City? Is that the way to handle it? Or would you prefer to see it's directly, we're going to start the pilot just in New York City? Would either way be of interest?
I think I'm kind of agnostic. I would really want to see New York City. You know, anytime you're doing New York State level stuff, we really have to know how this is affecting New York City. And of course, like there's disproportionate number of nonprofits in the city versus the state. I think it would be important to see the overall project cost, and then the slice of it that's New York City would be helpful, as well as the kind of impact of the state nonprofits versus the city nonprofits. And whenever we're doing state level work, we really want to make sure that either it's disproportionately affecting New York City, or you can cut down to what you're doing at the New York City level.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else?
I guess this is kind of a follow-up on
Sure.
to,
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
Keith again.
Oh,
And
hi, Keith. Go
I
ahead.
didn't follow protocol.
I saw you. I saw you.
I just,
You're on top.
it's
No
just,
worries.
this feels intimate, this
It's
environment, and I
intimate.
appreciate
Yeah, we're all friends.
So, yeah, and I know this is funky, but it's sort of like, I guess it builds on Megan and kind of Ibrahim. Is like, there's kind of like this idea of socializing budgets and project scopes. And like where you sort of like talk about like, this is what we're trying to do, and you're trying to figure out, kind of like the funding amount. And there's a little bit of back and forth around the budget. It sounds like this, like the preference here is like submit the budget, sort of make that determination on like what we need. Like oftentimes what we're sort of seeking is sometimes it's a portion of the project budget, sometimes it's more or less, and sometimes there's some helpful dialogue that happens. And then I think from an equity perspective, sometimes that dialogue doesn't happen because you're trying to create kind of a level playing field across organizations. So just, does your process kind of allow for any of that dialogue or back and forth
Yeah.
post? Okay.
Yeah,
And like,
yeah.
where does that kind of happen in the timeline?
That happens in our proposal review process. So I think I can speak for my colleagues that we really engage with potential grantees and have lengthy conversations about the narrative, about the budget, about the request, and spend a lot of time really making sure it's a right sizing it for the organization and for the trust given our budgets. I would want you to, when you submit something, be honest and submit for what you need, but know if you're submitting a $500,000 request, we're most likely going to look at it and be like, yeah, no, we can't do that. So it's, I think, and putting that in a narrative and really kind of articulating why you presented the budget as so, I think is helpful. And when I've been reading proposals. So yeah, we definitely have lengthy conversations. And as I said, we review every single proposal that comes through and really critically look at the budget and other pieces of the narrative. Barbara, did I get that right? You want to add anything to that?
That's right, Rachel. It's where I think depending on the scope of the project and also other available funding, there's a great deal of discussion that we do with applicants around the budget and the grant size from the trust.
And we talk internally a lot. So I talk with all of my colleagues very regularly, kind of agreeing on budgets and sharing our funding, because we have really kind of specialized funding, but there's a lot of overlap. So, that's a conversation that we have with the grantee and a conversation that we have amongst ourselves. Stephen.
Hi. So to follow up in terms of the single submission, multiple submission, we've been, first of all, I just want to say thank you to New York Community Trust for your incredible support, and especially during COVID, we got a nice grant, and it was so much appreciated and so much needed. So thank you, first of all, and then the second, we have been doing a lot of intensive work through a Go Vote New York City initiative, which is headed by the New York Community Trust. So, we're talking with program officers about what does 2023 and 2024 look like. Does that preclude us from, submitting a proposal for another program area?
So Rachel, I'm happy to answer that question. We often have funder collaboratives, such as the one that you were mentioning, Stephen,
Right.
Go Vote New York City,
Right.
that sort of overlap with our regular grant making, for example, in civic affairs.
Right.
So when we are managing a collaborative like Go Vote, then usually there's a call for proposals, and organizations can apply to that particular RFP, if you will, but they may already have put in a regular proposal to the trust. And so we all, as program officers, we could see what are the applications that are in process for a particular organization and either determine the overlap. And it's like, oh, this might be better for that funded collaborative, or they're basically the same. So we do that internal analysis, but the organization is not precluded from applying to what I think of as special initiatives, like a call for proposals, whether it is from a collaborative fund or whether it is we ourselves putting out a call for proposal that goes above and beyond our regular grant making. So in that case, there's no conflict. I think that Rachel was talking more about multiple proposals for different program areas within our regular competitive grant making program.
Agreed. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it.
And just one thing that Barbara reminded me of, I mentioned earlier that we do not have an LOI process. This is actually not the case for the entire trust, because we do regularly put out LOIs and RFPs for special projects, for collaborative funds. Our environmental program has an LOI process that it uses. So I would say regularly check our website. I think we also advertise those open RFPs and LOIs on LinkedIn and Facebook, I believe. So just to be aware of all the RFPs and LOIs that are open.
Thank you.
Okay, Equesta.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm Eddie Cuesta from Dominicanos, USA, and I really appreciate, this opportunity to really hear, such an important, informative webinar. But I just wanted to get a little sense in terms when you mentioned the light revision that was developed in 2005, and you're looking to develop, some type of revision when it comes to civic engagement and voting, something new. If you could elaborate on that, in terms of, what
Sure. So as Rachel mentioned at the beginning, every 10 years or so, we take a look at our, different grant making strategies. So the civic affairs grant making strategy is way past 10 years. So we are going this year to take a look at it and make some updates. I want to, any fears that you may have, allay those fears and say, I don't anticipate that there will be deep revisions to any area except for the one about civic learning for children. I think we are going to look deeper at that particular part of the strategy. The other aspects of it, particularly voting and improving the voting administration, the electoral administration process, those are probably going to remain the same. We're just going to update it. So, but in the meantime, as we work on revising the strategy, we continue to, respond to proposals that come in. So it's not like, it's not the kind of revision where it's like, oh, we're not accepting proposals for the entire year until we have a new strategy. We don't use that approach. As we are revising our strategies, we continue to respond to anything that comes in through our application process. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Someone asked if we will share this deck, and yes, we will share the deck and the recording with those of you who have RSVP'd. And another question was whether we can provide follow-up or feedback on our declines. And yes, we do provide feedback on our declines. In most cases, it's the organization emails us and we follow up with them. So we can't provide very specific information or how to make the proposal better and to resubmit it. We don't generally like to do that, but we can provide some general feedback as to why the project was declined. Anyone else in the last couple minutes? Going once, going twice. Any burning questions? You have opportunity to ask us anything you want. Okay. If you have any other questions, our email addresses are here. So if you wanted to ask us something in a little bit more of an intimate setting, you can always reach out to Barbara or I. We're very responsive. And thank you to everyone for your great questions and for your participation.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Have a great day.